Welcome everybody, this is SharePoint Patterns and Practices special interest group around the PnP Sites Core and PnP PowerShell, including the PnP provisioning engine as well. And in here we talk about quite often scenarios like how do we provision sites, how do we automate stuff, how do we do governance in SharePoint Online. And in the special interest group you always want to make sure that there's also enough time for Q&A as well, if there's any random questions or random topics which we want to talk about. We did have a monthly community call yesterday, and the recording is going to go out within an hour as well, or pretty soon. So we don't have actually humongous amount of new stuff comparing on yesterday, but let's see if you have any specific questions and all of that. But we wanted to actually do certain, let's say, small things and tell you something what is coming and show you some scenarios as well. So quickly, agenda for today, a miscellaneous announcement and nothing too major in there, but I'll show you, well, I mentioned the MSDN documentation on the core, and I think that's it. Then what I was planning to do is quickly show you how to provision programmatically communication sites. These are not yet available. They will be coming in the first release tenants relatively soon. I cannot say when, but they're coming, but we can actually talk about that from a provisioning perspective as well. And then the third topic is the SharePoint Framework solutions and automating provisioning to sites or site. So let's talk about that one as well. Obviously, if you're into the site provisioning, if you're into the PnP PowerShell or PnP Sites Core, quite often you're trying to automate something like how to get customizations on the sites, how to do governance on those customizations, and that's a great topic to talk about in here as well, even though it slightly overlaps on the SharePoint Framework special interest group. And then as a final topic, there's a WebHook support for PnP Core component, which was released as part of the June release, and hopefully we'll get Bert on the call by that time. So Bert is right now still on a away status because he has a family conflict, but he's planning to join relatively soon in the call. But if you have any questions when we move along within the presentation, feel free to use the iron window. I'll follow up on that one as well. We do have Patrick on the call from the PnP Core team and probably a few others, and we can anyway have an open discussion in the iron window on the topics what we go through and all of that. We should have enough time for Q&A today, so if there's any random questions, if you have challenges, if you're trying to achieve something, let's see if we can help you on that. And obviously, if you have any questions on the timing or questions on the what's about to get released and when, let's see if we can talk about those as well. But let's open up the Q&A later on the call. Now, on the miscellaneous announcements, I actually included this one still here, even though this was already shown 2 weeks ago, because it is a relatively good thing. So the PnP Sites Core API reference documentation is now available in MSDN. And this was updated as part of the June release, unless mistaken. I haven't actually double checked the situation, but my assumption was that it was getting updated during the release as well. But the whole point of this one is that you can more easily access the API documentation for the PnP Sites Core, and if you're looking into PnP PowerShell commandlet documentation, that's actually in the MSDN as well. So you don't have to go to GitHub and trying to find the documentation. You can easily use Google, Bing, whatever search engines, and MSDN to access that those references. Now, on the actual topics, let's say the specific topics of today. So what I wanted to quickly go through is talk about the communication sites from a programmatically perspective. So what are they and all of that. So like mentioned, they will be coming up in first release tenants relatively soon. So pretty soon you can actually create them by yourself. But I can show you today how to programmatically provision communicational site using an REST API, which is available in SharePoint. Now, we will have much more detailed guidance, samples, and all of that obviously available whenever the communication sites are going to be released. Communication sites are technically they are normal SharePoint sites. So this is actually underneath the cover, it is actually a, so to say, a new site definition, but it's only a site definition in SharePoint Online, so you don't actually see that. It is a normal SharePoint site, which might be a small surprise. It is not associated with Office 365 Group, at least currently, so it is not exactly the same as the modern collaboration sites, which are associated always to the Office 365 Group. And really the key point of thinking on that one has been that it's consistent with the classic way of SharePoint permission handling and all of that. So it looks more like a classic SharePoint site from a structural perspective than the modern Office 365 Group. The preview and the first release preview, or the preview usage of this one, will start with a REST API support for provisioning. So we will get this one documented. And obviously, if you need to have more additional APIs, for example, PowerShell support or CSOM support, please do provide an input on those requirements whenever the announcements in the Microsoft Tech community will go out. This will happen. They will be available, how would I put it, within weeks rather than months, not giving anything more important away. So relatively soon. And like mentioned, we will have more detailed technical documentation available on this template when it's available within the first release tenants. Today, I'm going to show this against our Microsoft MSIT site. So I'm going to provision a site directly in the Microsoft tenant. So just to demonstrate how it actually can be done. And let's jump in on this one. So what I did earlier today, because I was in a relatively big hurry, so I wrote a simplistic console application to demonstrate this one in practice. So let me actually show you this one in as a demo. So I'm going to share my screen, and hopefully the network gods are with us. And let me share that. There is a question already from Stefan. Good question. Will this be available in on-prem? I can't confirm that, and I can't deny that at this point. It will be anyway first in the SharePoint Online. I can assume that it will be coming to on-prem at some point, but I can't promise that. Really do not own the feature by myself. Now, so talking about the automation of the site provisioning, I'm going to mute a few people from the line, just making sure that there's no background noise. There we go. So, so what I've done here is a simplistic console application. This is following up on the REST API console application, which is demonstrating how to provision a modern group site or a modern collaboration site as well. And hopefully you guys can see what I'm sharing, guys and girls who are joining on the call. Just can somebody confirm that the screen sharing is fine?
Yeah, it's working.
Excellent, Brian. Thank you. Good. So let me execute this one in practice, and I'll show you there's breakpoints on certain locations, and I can explain what's actually happening within the code. I'm not going to step in step by step within the code because there's no point for doing that. I'll show you the key points, and then we'll share this sample and a slightly polished version of the sample whenever the communication sites are actually available for you to start play with. But I'll do an F5 in my Visual Studio 2017. That will start up a console, which is then asking the URL of the site which I need to connect. So in my case, I'm not going to actually use my personal tenant or E3 tenant. I'm going to use our MSIT tenant. And then I'm signing into that tenant. And just a word of a warning, do not send me an email because I don't have time to read any of the emails which are coming in, so no point doing that. And let me sign in with my password as well. Then it's asking the title of the new site. So let's call this, let's say, test Vesa SIG call, special interest group call, and let's actually use that also as the alias. So that's going to be then used as the URL part after the tenant prefix and the sites and all of that. And then it's asking what a description on the communication site. So description for my new site. and then it actually starts processing. So first thing what the console is doing, I'm just double checking that my access information was correct. So I didn't do any typos. I'm going to just do a quick execute query using CSOM, and that's going to essentially validate my password and my ID, unless it's exploding. There we go, all good. So at this point, I'm not going to deep dive on the code like mentioned, but essentially what we're doing is that we have there is a REST API to double check. Do we actually, let me actually do a breakpoint here as well. Where do we have it? There's the actual method, which I didn't have a breakpoint yet. So we are able to check the availability of the individual URL. And that's the first thing what we're doing, running against the REST API. So doing an F5, it will then execute until that line of code. And pretty soon we should have a breakpoint. Dum, ba-dum, bum, bum. Why is Visual Studio this slow? Every now and then it is. Or did we hit the breakpoint already? No, we didn't. There we go, there's my breakpoint. So I'm going to go one step forward, but we're essentially doing a REST API call against group site manager, get valid site URL from alias. And this is essentially the same REST API which can be used to check if the modern collaboration site URL is available. So we're checking against that alias. And this is a normal get REST operation, which is then getting synchronized or executed against SharePoint Online. So let me put a breakpoint not over there, breakpoint over there. So we're able to jump in and see what's actually happening. It's just a call against the underscore API group site manager get valid site URL from alias and alias value. So in this case, the alias value was test vesa SIG call, and I'm getting a success call status call back, which is true. Which means that that URL is now available for me to consume. Technically, theoretically, somebody might actually overwrite that URL right now at this moment, and that would then fail to actual site creation. So that's always the case from a timing perspective, but that's kind of understandable. So that's validating that the URL is free. I'm going to do an F5, so I'm going to run through all of the plumbing code away, and then we're going to jump into the create communicational site async. So we do have a REST API, which will be then documented, and the JSON object format and all of that will be documented for you. So you're able to then use this API to create sites in the SharePoint Online, these communicational sites in SharePoint Online. So in this case, we are executing against API sites, publishing a site, and a create method, and we are sending the right JSON object as part of it. So the structure of the JSON object, there's really no point for me to show this at this point. It might still slightly be adjusted, but essentially we're sending the needed URL, we're sending the description, the title, and all of that against that REST endpoint. And then if we execute that until the post async, there we go. That's my post operation from my console application. And you can actually see how fast it is. So creating a new communication site is ready. 1, 2, 3. How about now? Not yet. There we go. And success is giving us true, which means that it was we were successfully able to create that communication site. So that was super fast. Just for the sake of it, I'm going to actually take the URL from the response. So let me take the HTTP address from here and open up a new browser in that window. So I'm able to show you that one in practice. So let's for that, and let's go to my team site, or sorry, communication sites, and there we go. We have our new glorious communication site available, which is using its own template, like mentioned, and it has a slightly more polished and complex UI as a starting point, where people are able to then start adding their content, adding the information, whatever is relevant for this communicational site. So the operation is relatively, it's super fast, like you saw, comparing, for example, for classic site collection creation in SharePoint. So this one has been highly optimized. There's multiple ways how it has been optimized. So we're basically using a master copy in the background. So one of the key reasons why it's faster is that we're essentially always taking a copy of an existing master template and then putting that one to the new URL and then applying all of the settings what you have done or what you have applied on top of it. These sites also, like mentioned, these are classic SharePoint sites, and you can see that also really easily if I go, for example, the site contents. It has the modern experiences, it's natively responsive, everything is like it should be. But if this is not actually necessarily the best point, let's go to the site settings. You can see that it's a classic SharePoint site. It has all of the classic galleries, all of that stuff right now available, at least still. And now if I go back on the front page of the site, let's get in here. It is absolutely natively responsive, so you don't have to do any magic on the site. So if I start scaling this site and the UI of the site, you can see that it's scaling properly within the smaller device and screen sizes. And it's still understandable. Oh, there we go. Now it actually flipped. And you can still see those news, and that would be the mobile experience on the site. And let's actually adjust that again in the wider selection. So pretty cool, super fast, how to make that happen, natively responsive. It is a typical SharePoint site. Right now, I created that in the Teams path, but I haven't, to be fair, I haven't double checked that today, but the intention is that you're able to create this underneath the sites section as well, because you are actually providing, as part of the URL, as part of the execution, you are actually providing the URL structure as well. So you are able to create the sites under the sites path as well. Where is it saying published? That's actually interesting, because I just created that. Let's go to the site contents. And that might be because interesting how the dates are. Well, the form templates are matching on when I'm doing my operation, which was 13 minutes past current time. Documents was modified on that time, and these are essentially the reason why these look slightly wrong now is part of the master template. Now there's quite a lot of background noise on the call, so I unmuted that one. And so like
might be part of the way how we provision Vesa.
Yes, so exactly. We talked about that one. So it's based on the master site copy process. So these elements are part of the master site, which are getting copied, and then we're overlapping that with the settings which are being applied. Yeah. Joel was essentially just doubting, did I actually did this or not? So was it a fake or not? But we're not going to actually spend too much time on the structure and too much time on the capabilities. I just wanted to essentially show that the capability is there. You are able to programmatically create this using the REST APIs. We're working on additional API plan as well. And then if you would like, for example, to have CSOM API support for all of this, that's a awesome feedback, which we need to get to the engineering as well. Good. Does it have any publishing features activated? It's a question from Martin. So by default, this one isn't actually using classic publishing, and that's due to reasons as well. So the classic publishing is super heavy. So if I go to the site collection features, or site features, doesn't really matter. because we have a purposing feature in both, we can see that the server purposing is not enabled and is not activated. Our intention is not actually use classic WCM purposing in the modern SharePoint experiences, because the classic WCM purposing is super performance intensive. And you probably have seen how long it takes when you activate a site collection scope purposing feature and all of that. So the plan rather is to provide all of the needed capabilities what were part of the purposing feature using then alternative routes. As an example, let's say scheduling or so on. Good question from Aruna. Is it possible to create communication sites via CSOM? Answer is no, at least right now. So we're looking into all of this API surface right now into engineering. Currently, we only have a REST API to make this happen. But that's a good feedback, and we absolutely need to get the demand collected on the CSOM requirement for creating this.
And if there wouldn't be a CSOM vessel, we can always, if there's a stable REST API from the PnP side, we can wrap it in our create site extension method, for example. So that for you as a consumer of the PnP Core sites library, it's abstracted away. You just tell me create this particular site, and under the hood, we will use the proper APIs to make it happen.
Yes, correct. Stefan has a good question around the branding. Our branding story will evolve within upcoming months quite significantly. So it won't be based on the classic master pages or .master page model. It will be based on a different way of adjusting the branding. There will be absolutely branding capabilities. You will have a centralized control in the branding and all of that. I can't show any of those capabilities today. Because I don't want to actually disclose anything which we shouldn't be showing yet. Good. Yeah, so for branding, maybe for classic purposing, maybe the branding, classic purposing might have been a must for the classic branding, but for the modern branding, we're looking into doing that in a more lightweight way, so that you're able to still adjust the branding, adjust the layouts and all of that in the future as well. So we're definitely not planning to take any of the branding capabilities away. We do understand that the enterprises need to have flexibility on the branding. And for the time being, you can always fall back on the WCM. So if you need to have WCM as in the classic branding, if you need to have full flexibility on the UIs, full flexibility on the branding, classic purposing is 100% supported, and we're looking into it, making improvements on that one as well. As an example, the Office 365 CDN, the private CDN section is targeted to improve the performance on the classic branding. Good. Okay, let's actually flip back on the slides and talk about something else. Happy to answer the questions if there's any additional questions coming in on the discussion. But I'll flip back on the slides and let's talk about the next topic in here. If I can get the slides back. It's loading, so that should be a good sign. Some people cannot see what's being presented or shared. I do apologize if that's the case. If you're using a Skype, please do restart. That usually helps. The presentation is in the centralized location of the meeting. Now, that was a relatively short and quick demo on the communication sides, but the whole point is that we've shown that a few times. We've shown that in the summit. We've shown that in some of the conferences. I just wanted to pinpoint the fact that from a programmatically and from a dev perspective, you will absolutely have a way to provision those in the future as well. And we're looking into having that guidance available whenever we go to the dev preview. Now, on a next topic, so we wanted to quickly talk about the SharePoint Framework and provisioning time support. So how to get customizations to the sites. And this is kind of a topic which is overlapping between two different special interest groups, but quite often the people who are responsible of the site provisioning or PnP PowerShell usage or automation are the ones who've been asked to automatically apply, for example, web parts and let's say SharePoint Framework extensions to the sites as part of the site provisioning. And I wanted to kind of quickly touch that today, so you'll know what's coming up in the future as well, and kind of know where we are heading and what will be actually available. Now, before we go there, just to explain what the SharePoint Framework is all about and what's actually currently available. So SharePoint Framework is right now more a UI-based customization story on SharePoint Online. If you need to do any, let's say, back-end systems or long-running operations, you'll always still use exactly the same, let's say, patterns like you used to do in the past. You call a web API, which will start an Azure web job. You call an Azure function for the operations, and then you call back on the SharePoint for operations. So SharePoint Framework provides UI-level customizations, like the client-side web parts, which went GA back in end of February. And then last week, or was it week before? I think it was last week. Time is flying so fast. Last week we went to dev preview with SharePoint Framework extensions, and there's a nice set of guidance available how to get started with that development as well. And as part of the SharePoint Framework extensions, we introduced Application Customizer, which is essentially equals to the, let's say, user custom action model in the SharePoint sites. We introduced the list view command set, which is essentially executing JavaScript when somebody's clicking a button in a list or in a library, or then field customizer, which is how to render the field value and render the field information in the lists. So essentially same as JS link in the old techniques. Now, from a provisioning perspective, what's kind of an interesting around this one is that, okay, how does the provisioning, how does the activation of the SharePoint Framework solution work in practice? And they work right now exactly the same way as with add-ins. So if you ever build a SharePoint hosted add-in or provided hosted add-in, the process is pretty much the same, especially if you compare this on the provided hosted add-in. So the SharePoint Framework solution consists from two different parts. It consists from a SPFx file, which is essentially a manifest file, which is getting deployed on an app catalog. The actual implementation can be considered to be almost like a provider hosted add-in. So you need to make sure that you are hosting your JavaScript somewhere in the internet. So you need to decide your CDN hosting location. Technically, that could be a SharePoint site or your SharePoint tenant as well. So that absolutely works as well. Now, how do we actually get these solutions available within a site? And this is the current situation, and I want to be super clear on this. This is the current situation. We need to get the solution package deployed to the app catalog. And right now, the only way to get the customization, the client-side web part or the application customizer and so on, activated is by installing that SPFx solution to the site. In the same way that the only way you can get really add-in available within a site is by installing the add-in in a site. The UIs for doing that is exactly the same. You go to add an add-in functionality, you'll just see also the SPFx solutions together with add-ins there, and you're able to install that on a site, and that activates then the functionality. As part of that activation, you can automate the association of the needed objects and needed properties, which is the client-side component ID in the user custom actions or in the SP field or field object. So that's the way it works right now, which obviously isn't optimal, because in many cases people have hundreds or thousands or hundreds of thousands of site collections, and they want to make sure that the customization, let's say a higher level application customizer or a widget on the header section of the page, should be available against all of those site collections. So we're looking into, in engineering, we're looking into unblocking this scenario, and the ideas are essentially following. So there's two different paths which we're working right now. In short term, and this is coming up relatively fast, we'll update the documentation, you'll see social media communications, you'll see blog posts into devdevelops.com on this one. But the idea is that when you build that SharePoint Framework solution, you are able to define that solution to be automatically available across all of the sites whenever the solution is getting installed on the app catalog. So the short-term solution is then, the process would be you install the solution in app catalog. The web parts are immediately available for usage across all of the sites, which are being marked using this specific attribute. The extensions are, however, slightly more complex story. The extensions do not light up automatically in the site because you need to explicitly enable them in a field or in a user custom action object. And that means that you need to then apply the client-side component ID matching the unique ID of the extension which is being installed on app catalog. And this is where the SharePoint provisioning templates, for example, will help you. So you can easily design your overall solution in a way that, hey, we have few application customizers and field customizers. As part of our initial setup, we'll get them all in the app catalog. And whenever we provision a site using, let's say, PowerShell or managed code, we'll use, for example, the PnP provisioning engine to set the right client-side component ID and properties to the right objects, which means that whenever the person goes to the site, those customizations are automatically lighting up, plus the web parts would be then available from the web part picker. Hopefully made sense. So this is going to happen relatively fast. So we're looking into enabling or unblocking that scenario quite fast, within weeks rather than within months. The long-term solution is then or add-on solution, so this will be available also in longer term, is to have so-called ALM APIs, and these are going to be supported for add-ins and also for SharePoint Framework solution. And these are really there to enable you the capabilities for deploying, updating, and deleting solutions and add-ins from the sites based on your wish and based on your code. So you can use then PowerShell or remote APIs to get those solutions or add-ins installed on the site and also updating them as a mass update. So in that case, you can install the solution to the app catalog and deploy a solution at the site using remote APIs, and then poof, stuff will start lighting up. As a small note on here, the PnP provisioning engine will have actually has already a native support for the extensions. So essentially, the client-side component ID support starting from June 2017 version. There's a good question from Russell. So on where does the site collection app catalog fit in? So this is something which we mentioned in our roadmap page within the devdevelops.com a while back already. And this is something which will enable the tenant admin to delegate more flexibility for individual site collections to activate solutions for them. And again, it's a one choice within the tool belt. So we want to unblock multiple different scenarios, multiple different, let's say, business cases. So the site collection scope app catalog is there for the sake that right now, currently, to be able to get anything activated or any customizations, any SPFx customizations available within your sites, you need to get them deployed on a tenant level app catalog. And in certain customers, that can be pretty difficult process. So customers want to have more flexibility. They want to have certain site collections where the site collection administrator will have the flexibility for installing add-ins or SharePoint Framework solutions available. So, and that's where the site collection specific app catalog will fit in. So the tenant administrator can control which site collections or where site collections the app catalog can be used by the site collection administrators to kind of delegate the responsibility of the customization deployment or have more flexibility within a specific set of site collections, which hopefully makes sense. And exactly, good comment from Russell on the building some web parts that are only needed in one site. Exactly the scenario. Yes, absolutely. Just double checking, and Ryan is confirming the scenario as well. Yes, there's kind of a multiple, obviously every single customer have slightly different way of doing stuff and slightly different requirements. Now, getting the short-term vision, which we have on the slides right now, the short-term, long-term, plus the application site collection scope, the app catalog available, will unblock humongous set of, let's say, challenges and humongous set of scenarios for the customers and partners to be able to work more efficiently with SharePoint Online customizations. Good. Just double checking that I didn't miss any massive amount of questions. No, I didn't. Cool. Good. Let's move on the following topic. So, like mentioned when we started, we might or might not have Bert on the call, and Bert made it. He had some family things to run through. Did you, Bert, had a chance to prep anything on this one?
Well, prep is maybe a big word, but yeah. I want to show the code really quickly. So let me actually share my screen around webhooks. So screen share coming up. All right. And while the screen sharing is starting, so you know that we have introduced webhooks already like about half a year ago, Vesa. I don't recall the exact date, but a while ago. Yeah. And back then we created screen sharing didn't start. Damn. We created a reference application that showed you how to use webhooks, how to kind of set them up, and how to consume the webhooks in a really robust enterprise way of doing. What we did now is we backported, and someone in the community helped me, Yannick Plevaux, I think is the last name, helped us backporting that code into Sites Core, which we then further completed and pushed out for this release. So we're going to try to share once more.
Or then you need to reconnect again.
If it's not, then I'm going to reconnect and then
loading for me.
Yeah, that's positive sign. No. All right, maybe just do it. Or you can share the screen as well. I can talk you through, but that's probably harder.
Yes. Let's try to reconnect if you don't mind, because typically that helps. So
doing it right now.
Yeah. So let's wait a while for Bert to reconnect, so we can actually have a look on that one. And it was indeed almost here. Yeah, I saw the frame in my screening as well. Typically it helps when people are reconnecting. If there's any questions, feel free to hit them on the iron window. I'm watching them as we talk before Bert is getting in back in the call. One thing maybe to mention, which I didn't have a slide because I forgot to create a slide on it. This will be the last special interest group call for PnP Sites Core and PowerShell until our summer break. So we'll be back in business fully using the normal bi-weekly schedules and monthly schedules and monthly releases starting from early August. So there will be a break during the July timeframe on the special interest group call for PnP Core and PnP PowerShell. On the SharePoint Framework and JavaScript side, that special interest group will be running through across the summer because Patrick used all of his vacation time during holiday season in Christmas, which seems to be the theme within the US-based people. But anyway, now we can see what Bert is sharing, so we can actually have a look on this one.
All right. So I'm going to show you two places where we introduce webhooks. Webhooks is like many of the PnP extensions, is a .NET extension. In this case, since we have webhooks on a list, we enabled webhooks list extensions. The code is ready to support other types of webhooks once they become available, but currently we only have list webhooks. So on the list extensions class, there's a number of methods that you can use to add, update, and delete and query for webhooks. Now, it's more interesting to see how they're actually used, and for that there is test cases. So there's a general tip actually. If you want to figure out how a particular API is used, first do a quick search in our test projects, because a lot of the APIs that we created are being tested. Not all, and we try to get to a better coverage, but a lot of APIs are there, including webhooks. So there is under list extensions, test class, you will also find webhook test cases. So I have this guy open over here. If you have a look, then you can see how simple it becomes to test to kind of add a webhook. So this is a test doing an add webhook. What do we do from a code perspective? You create a webhook subscription. What's important for a webhook subscription is, okay, when does it expire? By default, it's 6 months, but you can have a different expiration time. Or the max is 6 months, but you can go lower, actually, to be honest. Where do we need to call back? So you need to set up an endpoint, which is listing for your webhook. So if your webhook fires, so suppose you have a webhook on a document library, if you add a document, SharePoint will hit your endpoint. There's this test webhook URL. And you need to specify the actual list that the webhook is working on. You specify those 3 values in this class, and then you just simply call add webhook subscription, and that's it. Under the hood, this will use REST calls, and we will figure out, like, if you're app only, we will grab the bearer token and use that one to go to SharePoint. If you use user-based authentication, we will grab the cookie and use the cookie to make the call. So it works in both cases. But yeah, I find it's fairly simple to set up a webhook on your list. You have similar things to update a webhook. So in this case, I'm changing the expiration date, kind of making it 7 days longer valid. So you change expiration date, you do the update, or remove, or just query and give me all the webhooks on this particular list. So it all becomes really easy to do with PnP, with the Sites Core library.
Sorry, Peter has a good question on the expiry date. One way of working around
expiration date of webhooks
is just always to extend the expiration date automatically as part of your calls. Now, we are looking in the engineering to automatically expand your expiration date if you call the endpoint. So we're looking into having that kind of an automatic way of extending that. Right now, it's still not there. It's something which is in our roadmap. We're looking into doing that in the future.
Yes, just to add up on that question, it's not in our, we don't have it today as part of the product, but what you can do today, and which is actually in our reference implementation, the code is there, the sample is there. What you can do is each time when your webhook gets hit, you can check whether, okay, am I about to expire? If so, I'm going to extend expiration with another month. So that way you keep your webhook alive. The downside is there's still a theoretical case that if the webhook is never called for within 6 months, so let's say you create a site, a brand new site, it has a webhook on the document library. No one uses that document library for 6 months. At that point, your webhook still is gone because you didn't have an option to extend it because it was never called. But at that point, you can argue, do I really need a webhook on something which is not used for 6 months? So it's debatable. But so you could do this already today, but you require code. If there's a product feature, what Vesa mentions, that would be even better. Then you don't have to think about it anymore in the future. And that code is available from the reference implementation over here. Now, why I actually popped up this documentation is also just to remind you again, like setting up a webhook service endpoint is really, really simple using Azure Functions. So if you haven't done this, check out this manual and use it to set up your own webhook. It is a matter of 5 minutes and you have it running. You can copy the actual code from here. In this case, it is submitting the results to a storage account, but you could do anything at that point with your webhook payload that you get from SharePoint. So highly recommended to check out this one if you want to have a quick. You need to quickly create a webbook for testing purposes, for example, or just for production as well. Doesn't matter. All right, I think this was a quick overview of the webhook capabilities in PnP CSOM Core. I hope it will help the webhook adoption. And if there are any questions, let me scroll through the questions. Anything we missed?
Nope.
All right, okay.
So flipping back on the slides. Cool. Thanks, Bert. And we have then 50 minutes for random Q&A questions and topics. If there's any things what we want to talk about, something what we saw today, something what you saw yesterday, or questions on bugs on, let's say, from whatever on SharePoint development. Silly question / request, but struggling with this. Can you show an example of a successful upload of a file as an attachment to an item using PnP PowerShell? Struggling to get the item attachment files to work. I don't seem to be able to build a correct creation information object. Good question. I know that unfortunately Irvin, who's our main guy for the PowerShell, is today or this week on vacation. I think he's enjoying his break on the Switzerland, unless mistaken, or was it in Austria or Germany? I can't remember. But I think what I would actually suggest, Scott, is that please, if you haven't done that, open up an issue discussion in the Microsoft Tech community, and we'll try to follow up on that one. I can't actually get a definite answer on that right away, but you can absolutely CC me, for example, on that discussion, or then there might be other people in the Microsoft Tech community and we're able to help with the question. So that would be probably the easiest way to proceed. And let me get you the AKMS address on that one as well, just to make sure that you find the right location. I think there's quite nice active community, finally getting to the Microsoft Tech community as well. We used to have a super active Yammer group, still remember those times, but now we're heading more and more to the Microsoft Tech community side, when the Yammer network was closed down. Good. Any other questions, comments? Has someone managed to put a Docker apps to SharePoint FX web parts? Docker apps to SharePoint Framework web parts, or to use SharePoint Framework web parts in Docker, or I'm not quite sure about the question. We've been testing that, at least running SharePoint Framework web parts in a Docker in the context, we've been testing that quite significantly in the engineering, and we are using that partly as well. And also we've been working on future guidance on that one together with Waldeck from the PnP Core team. That guidance has been, however, slightly deprioritized on other stuff. Idea is to host provider-hosted apps inside of the Docker image to show it across the SharePoint. That would be interesting. I haven't tested that scenario. That's pretty interesting, actually. It's really a matter of how do we host the Docker, how do we host those provider-hosted add-ins in that case. But yeah, theoretically it should actually work. I personally haven't tested that. And I don't know if there's anybody in the call who has. No comments. Any other comments, issues, challenges, problems where we might be able to help? I see SPFx now has their own dialog control. Is that wrapper around Fabric dialog? If so, any plans to wrap other Fabric controls? That is a wrapper around the Fabric dialog. There will be more insights and documentation on that one relatively soon. I just wrote the tutorial for extensions to show the dialog behavior, because it is a new thing as well. but we're trying to do in the future is to make the usage of the Fabric controls as easy as possible, so that people can more efficiently maybe use them in a SharePoint framework. We're also looking into starting a separate community-driven initiative on reusable controls, because even though we're Microsoft, we do not have an infinite resources, and quite often if we work together with community, we can make things happen faster. But the dialog is a good example of a Fabric based abstraction, or wrapper on the Fabric, and there definitely will be other ones in the future as well. And Paul wants to put those reusable components to the Visual Studio extension. Absolutely, yes. After you mentioned modern branding, when will you be able to tell us more about it? I would love to be able to tell you more about it. Things are still slightly moving here and there. I would expect that we will have visible announcements during summertime. Definitely will show practical stuff in Ignite. Ignite is in the mid-September. So, but there should be, I think we showed something related on, let's say the initial step related on the modern branding already in the SP Summit videos. I can't remember which one was it, but if I remember correctly, or at least in the draft videos, there was a quick show off of how the branding can be used on the modern site. And good, Peter helped on the attachment discussion. I know that we can change the new site on the SharePoint Home with a custom form, but will be applicable for all creation source mail planner. We plan to use a custom site creation form. Unfortunately, no, not at least right now. The problem is really, if you think about the Office 365 group, from Outlook perspective, you're not actually creating an Office 365 site, or you're not creating a modern site. You are actually creating a inbox or email box in Exchange. And then as a site result, you'll get a SharePoint site. Or from a planner site, you are creating a planner, whatever space it is. And as a site result, you'll actually get a SharePoint site as well. So right now, at least, currently, there's no plans to have a one centralized form wizard for all of these applications, which we could be able to redirect users. The request does, however, make a lot of sense. And it would be great to get it recorded in the user voice and get a lot of votes on that one. I personally absolutely understand the requirement, but getting consistency across all of the different services on this scenario is slightly challenging, so to say. Is the team looking into reusable alternatives for proposing its variation, aka multilingual sites? I would say actually that's one of my favorite topics. Variations is not about multilingual sites. Personally, how would I put it? I've done quite a few personally, have done tens and tens of .com sites and global intranets in the past, and none of them you were using variations, because variations was never really suitable really for multilingual sites. The key reason is that typically there is, let's say, main language, and then there might be 10 to 15 additional languages, and nobody and no customer has enough resources to fully translate all of the content. And typically the sub-languages have anyway a different hierarchy structure rather than the main language. So in my scenarios, we always made them as a separate structures, which are individually maintained. Now, for the multilingual scenarios in the future, yes, the multilingual scenarios absolutely will be supported. Will it be based on the variation technique? Most likely not, because I don't think that was such a great implementation for multilingual experience. but we'll see. I can't actually get any details. I don't know any actual details on the future plans on that one, but we need to get the input on the engineering on the requirements of having easy structure and handling for those. And just double checking the discussion as well. Yes. Application extensions available on classic sites, not in plans. Unfortunately, right now the SP, it's kind of considered that in the classic sites you can fall back on the classic customization modes, so using the JS link and the script link in the user custom action, and then in the modern sites you can use the SharePoint Framework experiences. Only exception is client-side web parts, which will work on both sides, and that's really the direction and thinking behind of the divider. The communication side, like actually Bert mentioned, not yet in dev tenants and not yet in dev preview or in first release. It will be coming there relatively soon. Someone did a demo here on another SIG on the global nav mega menu, and that is correct. I think I did that in one of the calls last week, and that was around the application customizer using extension. We do have tutorials available on the application customizers, and URL for those tutorials is in the IM window right about now. And that's essentially walking through the different ways of building modern customizations.
When it comes about global navigation vests, I think yesterday's monthly call also showed
yes,
the work around that Ron did around publishing. So we have an example how to build high-performing JavaScript components. We show them in publishing pages, but
yes, true.
Yeah, but they apply to any site as well, so you could leverage that to build your global navigation in a good way.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, correct. It's a dull discussion of yesterday. Ryan is saying it in the IM. Yeah, that's the one.
And we'll get to yesterday's recording out in a YouTube channel within 30 minutes. Well, something like that, or within 1.5 hours, to be honest. Good. In classic sites, we can override the web part titles and content editor web parts. It is handled correctly in modern sites. You can provide multilingual experience on the web part titles in the modern web part experiences. Now, classic web parts are not available in the modern sites. So it has to be a modern site, modern web part, which is available in the modern site. So that's really the one key challenge around that one as well.
Yeah, and I think when it comes to classic sites, I don't think we extract translated web part titles, but I think you can change the template file and define a resource for it, and then that should work to apply it. So for Benoit's question, if it doesn't work, please create an issue in the PnP GitHub PnP CSOM Core repository.
Ralph has a comments around the multilingual sites and multilingual designs, and that's the organizing of the content in multilingual sites is how would I put it? It's a long-lasting discussion. So typically what we've done, or my classic approach personally when I was still as a field person, and I did quite a few global deployments on those kind, was that we have a main site collection where people are landing, which is the main language of the company. Typically it was English, and then based on a user profile selection, we showed in the main menu or main mega menu the translated language, which was actually an own isolated site collection as well. Because individual countries and individual languages had only a subset of content, we were not using variations, because variation just replicates the structure. It doesn't actually translate you stuff. Even though theoretically there's a automatic translation, but let's face it, machine-based automatic translation is typically not good enough for any languages. So it's more around the designing of the information structure, information architecture, and based on the use cases as well. So how many people are using which languages, how many people are on which countries, what are you planning to share from alternative countries? Should we aggregate the information from multiple languages to the front page, or will the user profile defined that will show the global news plus the localized news in the front page of the root site? There's kind of a gajillion scenarios there. And maybe this could be a good, let's say, a guidance point to write in our thinking in the future as well. Multilingual sites are slightly problematic, and there's quite a few different ways of resolving that issue. Good. Benoit is having issues around exporting sites or extracting sites for all of the languages, and that could be, yeah, we need to actually have a look on that. If that's an issue, let's have a look on that later. Or if you submit an issue, we'll definitely are interested of looking into that one as well. Collaboration teams are typically working at least in a single language unless they're doing is actually involving translations. Yeah, well, typically working at least depends on a customer. Absolutely depends on a customer, depends on a region, depends on a country, depends on a company culture of the whatever. So good. We are hitting the hour. Ralph has a comment, so just quickly looking into, so I need to translate everything properly, overkill the requirement, are vague enough to say show this in a user language or don't show more than that. Yes. The problem, I'll address the classic requirement on the multilingual sites. So whenever we have customer discussions with customers on the multilingual sites, the number one requirement for the business users is, yes, we want all of our content to be translated in all of the languages what our company has. And then you start dissecting that requirement down, which is, okay, sounds good, let's make that happen. So how many languages and countries your company has? Well, we have operations in, let's say, 20 countries, but in some of those countries there are multiple languages, which is okay. So we'll end up having 25 languages. Does that then mean that we are differentiating the content based on a country or based on a language, which is a number one requirement, or a really good question to actually resolve first? And then customer might say, hey, we want to actually have all of the content in all of the languages. Okay, fine, that sounds reasonable. And then let's think about the process of creating any content. So somebody creates first the English version. Typically the English is the main language, or French version or a Spanish version of the main content, and releases that in a pages library in SharePoint. Now, what happens next is the key thing. Even though you would have an automatic replication of that page to multiple different languages, the machine-based translations do not work. They do not work in any language, and quite often, if you have a look on a discussion with communicational directors or communicational people, they say, well, it's not good enough. The machine translation typically has significant flaws, and the companies cannot rely on the machine translation because quite often the internal communications and the articles are, let's say, they might be important information. So now if the company then has 25 languages, that would then require that there are 25 full-time employees almost doing these translations for all of those languages. Technically, from a SharePoint perspective, yes, we can absolutely make this happen. But then when you start looking into that process, what would it actually mean for the customer, and what are the investments and what are the actually costs related on having let's say first those 25 people who are creating these translations, and then also what's the SLA for getting those translations to be done. So are those 25 people ready to commit on a certain SLA to get the translation out? Because what if it's critical news and we need to get it translated? And then when you have analyzing that business requirements, you start looking into the process, and then you're looking into the costs related on making that process happen, which is not technical discussion, it's a discussion on the processes of the customer. Quite often the companies realize that, well, actually this isn't the smart thing to do, or we don't have enough money to do that. And that's when they fall back on a slightly more simplified processes. So that's always the challenge within the IT. We need to think through not only the IT solution, not only the technical solution for making something happen. Does the variation work? Well, technically it does. But that's not actually the most difficult question in the multilingual sites. It is actually the human operations which are required to maintain that kind of a structure. So, but there's multiple dimensions, and then it really comes down on the business requirements and let's say the frequency of maintaining the content, what is static, what is not static, how many updates we're planning to do, how do we replicate that. So there's so many factors in the multilingual design. Good. Good comment about the Chewbacca and R2D2 and everything else. So sorry for that small ranting based on my experience working with larger customers in the different countries as well. But thank you everybody for joining. We went slightly off the time. That was me ranting around multilingual solutions. We will have a summer break on this SIG. We'll reschedule or we'll update the ICS, the calendar invites within a few weeks, and we'll restart in the early August after the summer break. But thank you everybody for joining. Thank you everybody for your input and questions and your commitment and your suggestions and everything. We want to adjust our SharePoint and our Office 365 based on what you need. So please keep on that feedback coming, and let's absolutely stay in touch after the summer as well. Thank you. Bye-bye.